on small businesses and economic prosperity in AAPI communities. My name is Erly Peng,
and my name is Aisha Islam.
And we are both AAPI student fellows at the Ash Center. I want to start with a few announcements. Firstly, the Ash Center would like to acknowledge the land on which Harvard sits as the traditional territory of the Massachusetts people and a place which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange among nations. This panel is co-sponsored by the Rajawali Foundation Institute for Asia, the Taubman Center for State and Local Government, the Rappaport Institute for Greater Boston, and the HKS AAPI Student Caucus. This panel is being recorded, and should you like to make a remark or ask questions, please wait until our sound member gets to you with a microphone during our Q&A portion. And Aisha.
Yeah, so today we're really, really excited because we have two really awesome people with us. We have Shi, the first director of Asian Business Empowerment Council within the Asian Community Fund at the Boston Foundation, which is a new venture designed to coordinate and unify a community of business owners, entrepreneurs, service providers, and advocates to build a strong collective voice for the AAPI business community in Massachusetts. And we also have Chef Jason Doo, who is the chef and owner of Wusong Road Restaurant Tiki Bar, which you guys know it's right down the road from HKS. This is super exciting. Very, very local, very, very familiar to like a lot of caucus dinners and different hangouts, birthday parties. And he is an alum of Menton in Boston and has worked in restaurants around the US and Europe. Jason grew up in Cambridge and his family owned a Chinese restaurant in Malden. So we're super excited. Early and actually both of us prior to coming to the Kennedy School have had like histories and past working in small business, like, and we care a lot about this, obviously being Asian American ourselves, obviously working in that space beforehand. So we're really excited to talk about this. Economic prosperity, economic justice, I think are huge, huge topics. So we're really excited and we're gonna get into it. But can we have a round of applause for our guests?
So, Chef Jason, I just want to start with you. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you started in the restaurant industry and what prompted you to open your own restaurant?
Basically, I think I am probably the last generation that could work your way through university and actually pay for it. And the easiest way of doing that was working in restaurants. My parents had a restaurant growing up. When I was younger, my father had pancreatic cancer, so I had to go in the kitchen to learn how to cook because family business, you just can't like close it down. So that's how I learned how to cook. And that was like one of those moments as this kind of speaking engagement doesn't bother me so much. I'm talking at you, we're not really engaged. More of an introvert. So for me to show, I guess, care to people, something like hosting a dinner or a party was very easy for me because I can be like, here's food. Food symbolizes, especially in Asian culture, symbolizes love. And then I can kind of disappear back into the kitchen, do whatever I want, and not necessarily have to sit down. So it became a fun career choice. I went to university actually for comparative theology and biblical exegesis. You can't really make money doing that. So it was one of those things where like, well, work through university, working in a diner. And then I was like, really still enjoy this, even though, there's some negative association. And then finally, working through kitchens in Boston, New York, France, and things like that, got the opportunity to come back to my hometown and open a restaurant. And decided like, let's take the risk, even though Harvard Square is the #1 rent in all the state of Massachusetts for businesses. So yeah, very happy to work with a local landlord versus a large fund or VC firm who's just buying a property. So we were able to secure what would be more of a like non-billboard deal, as you would call it. A lot of the businesses here, chains and banks, pay billboard prices. So we were able not to do that because we found a landlord partner almost who wanted to make sure there was ground floor activation for the area, which has traditionally seen significant failure, if that makes any sense.
Thank you, Chef Jason. So, QJ, in your role as the director of the Asian Business Empowerment Council, can you tell us a little bit more about what kind of support that you see AAPI businesses come to the council for, and also what kinds of support and services that have made the most impact from your experience?
Just to give you a little bit of history. I can't tell because hearing your own voice. So just to give you a little bit of history, so we are a very new initiative, and I kind of equate it with like a startup. So when you're in startup mode, there's a lot of unknowns, there's a lot of like testing theories and really trying to figure out trial by fire, all of those things. So I think for us, we're still trying to figure out how to respond to the community need. So one of the first things I did was really trying to understand the landscape of API businesses in Massachusetts. And there's not a lot of great data out there. So for those of you who do research, if you do demographic, reviews of the API population, you're probably familiar with the fact that data on API population is not disaggregated. So it's really, really hard to figure out, which ethnic groups are doing well, which ones are not doing well, what are the unique challenges that they face, because everyone's lumped into this umbrella. So I think for us, it's trying to really understand, well, what is going on with different communities, right? Like you have pockets of the Cambodian community in Lowell. They have a different set of experiences being a refugee community. You have the Vietnamese community in Dorchester, and they have a different set of experiences. So how do you begin to understand the uniqueness and the diversity of the community? And there is no shortcut, right? Like you have to really go out and talk to community organizations, community leaders. And that's what we have spent our time doing, is not trying to fast track to a solution, one size fits all, because there is no such thing, right? So I think right now one of the things that we're doing is conducting a statewide research project. So we're doing an online survey and a focus groups so that we can really understand what are the specific needs in each one of these communities. And we're going to disaggregate the data, which we're excited about, and really understand the needs by sector, by geography, by language needs. Things like that. But in terms of supports, I think in the short time that I've been the director, there's a lot of different things that I hear from the community. I think access to capital is one of the biggest ones for small businesses. And when you're an immigrant entrepreneur and you're new to a community, you really don't know where to start. So trying to figure out everything with your business operations, but then also how to navigate the complex systems of licensing, permitting, getting your alcohol, all of these things, compliance and employee immigration law. It's really difficult, and I think there's a lot of time that's spent for people who are business owners trying to figure those parts out, and it can be very lonely. So I think having an organization like ABEC, we're really trying to work with local organizations who hold those relationships, right? Because when you're a business, you're not going to go look for Google Asian Business Empowerment Council. Oh, okay, I should go to them. No, that doesn't happen, right? They're working with their local community organizations, like their neighborhood association, right? Like V8 as an example. They've existed in Dorchester for decades, and they've done so many different programs. They have a youth program, they have an early childhood program, and that's where people know and trust. So we are working with those organizations to really find out how can we best serve the businesses in that neighborhood.
And this is a question for both of you, and I'd love to have your input on when it comes to the challenges of running a small business. We hear all kinds of things in the media about grants and loans being inaccessible, supply chain disruptions, labor shortages, pandemic, and so on and so forth. From each of your perspectives, what have been some of the biggest challenges that Asian American small businesses in particular face? And let's start with you, Shi and Jason.
We started our business right before COVID hit. And we took the hard line that I was not going to run a Chinese restaurant beginning with W during COVID. So we decided to just eat that loss, because not to be anything, but that was just not a great time to let's open a Chinese restaurant with Rusong as the name. It was just not in the cards at that time. So we said hey, what is man? Bad name choosing at that point in time. But for us, it was very much capital was not so much an issue for me because it was just years of saving. You will not get a loan or a grant for a restaurant. Just hard line no. No bank will ever give it to you. They won't even give you a line of credit. It's no big bank. It's just not on one of their, it literally, hospitality is one of their things, they will not give it to you unless you're a hotel. So that's one. So it's all just pure raw savings and cash. And then most restaurants, especially minority restaurants, fail because the runway of cash is far too short. So if you don't really have 3 to 6 months of just pure operating capital, just sitting there, not even really making any money, actually losing money with inflation, you're bound to fail because restaurants, their debt cycles are in 60 to 30 days. So if you miss a bad debt cycle, you know, you can lose dollars in 1 week time just for covered payroll. So you have to be very, very weary on how you rotate debt and then how your P&L is looking. So when we started that restaurant, the reason why we chose the restaurant we did is because whenever you're going to a landlord, you really have to make sure that you have something called TI, tenant improvement allowance, that can make sure that can get you all your hard costs, which your landlord does keep, regardless if you pay for it or I pay for it. Your landlord will keep everything that is bolted down. It's always in every single commercial lease. So we made sure we found a landlord that gave us sufficient TI. We used the weight of the pandemic and all commercial places closing to get additional TI. We took the long term of the pandemic to do most of the build ourselves to save money. And then whatever we banked, we just stayed partially open until almost until June of last year. We didn't even open half the restaurant because of the shortage of trained staff and things of that nature. Everyone in my kitchen never cooked before. None of my bartenders ever bartended before. We had to train them from scratch. They were like nail salon people, hairstylists, because that's all who were looking for jobs at that time, because they often were immigrants who were, you know, maybe were uncomfortable getting certain benefits during that period of time, that still need to work. So they took the opportunity to learn. That's why if you look at our reviews, they start off at like 4 and then they slowly creep up because like no one know how to cook, man. Like ain't gonna lie, food sucked the first 6 months. So, but you know, it is what it is. But eventually you learn, you grow, you understand how far your runway is. Once you understand the length of your runway, then you start building and reinvesting into the business. We've you know, paid back everything I put in already, and now we're reinvesting all profits back into the business. That's why, you know, that's what it is. It's a very difficult building as well. But for us, you know, like to live on an island, I wish I had someone that would help, but you know, we know for restaurants, there's no money. You have to do it all your damn self. We didn't use a single lawyer in our entire process. Lawyers are too expensive. I was very lucky that when I went from dishwasher all the way up to chef, I made sure I did every role in the restaurant before COVID and I got fired. I was running a large restaurant group that was like $36 million in revenue, multiple outlets and properties across different states. Very lucky that the owner was a hedge fund manager, was the first one to enter Singapore when that opened to the United States. So they're fine with money. So they had in-house lawyers and things I could literally sit down and talk with about leases and things like that. So I used that period of my growth to make mistakes, learn from those mistakes, not on my money, and then take those and open my own spot. By saving all that money, as you said, that lack of business knowledge is huge. I'm also on the BIPOC Commission for Cambridge and things like that. And a lot of that is integrating with smaller minority businesses and being like, hey, like it's very important you do these steps. Don't skip these steps. Don't also pay a lot of money for these steps, because you know there's a lot of scams out there.
Yeah, and I'll share a little bit about my origin story too. And actually, I have a restaurant background. I've never been in a restaurant, but my parents own a restaurant, and they are actually ones that did fail, like you mentioned, because of some of the challenges that you said. And you know, my parents came, actually they never planned to come to the US. There was a freak accident in my family with a relative, and they had to come over and take care of something. Decided to stay because, you know, what a great opportunity for little QJ to grow up here and have a great education, American dream. Well, I didn't see them for 6 years because they left me back home to my grandparents. I was like, oh, I don't know who you are. So I came when I was 10, and you know, my mom actually started out at a Chinese restaurant in Amherst. They had no English skills. They did not speak the language. They had $200. I think they had government housing because of what happened with my other family members. Didn't know how to drive, had no friends. Really, this is a whole new world. They had no idea what they were doing. So my mom, started working at a Chinese restaurant. They treated her really badly. And she, she's a stubborn and very ambitious woman. So she just one day just said, like, F it, I'm gonna start my own restaurant. I'm gonna be my own boss. And she and my father, who had a really great job in China, he was actually one of the few people who were educated in his generation, went to college, worked at a state job, and then when he came to the States, he worked at McDonald's. So he really had a whole change in who he was and identity. And, as a man, as traditionally like providing for the family, that was no longer what he was doing. And they just decided, okay, well, we're going to save every penny and start a restaurant. And so they did. My mom started a restaurant. Unlike the other Chinese restaurant names like Jade Garden or Panda, Bamboo, whatever, she named it after herself. It's called Corinne's, or was called Corinne's, and she just, I just have so much love for her. So they bought a place, or I think they rented a place in Chicopee, which is a low-income town in Western Mass. And I think my mom had this dream of like, I'm gonna cook the like most authentic food. How can I like it? It feels like home to me. So she tried to do that, but then no one wanted it. So then she had to make, the General Tso's chicken, like, the sweet and sour soup, that kind of thing. And they worked 24/7 and really could not make it work. I mean, my mom was having health issues. People actually came to the restaurant and vandalized their storefront, or like they would come and like spill soy sauce all over the floors. And I think, to some extent, that type of thing I think still happens. There was, I think 2 years ago, there were a series of events where young people were vandalizing Asian restaurants in Holland. So, my parents opened that restaurant in the 90s, and this is still happening today. So when we're talking about these are the things that small businesses face, especially in this like anti-Asian climate. People don't feel very safe when they have businesses. And so I think that's one thing. But also, when I think about my parents' struggles, it's also the language issue, right? Like they didn't know like accounting. They didn't know how to file their taxes, right? Like, but being really resourceful, they learned very quickly. But I think even with that, they were highly educated, they were resourceful, but they still failed. So I think it's really difficult for a lot of small restaurants when you don't have, or small businesses in general, when you don't have resources available to you, or you don't know where to find that information.
Yeah, this is super relevant to our next question. Kind of, we're at policy school, so we really would love to discuss kind of how policy plays a role in the small business landscape, both in how it can really support and uplift a small business, but also maybe in very real ways it could hinder it. And maybe there's different regulations, different policies, different legislations that are making it kind of hard and difficult to run a small business. So what advice would you guys share with policymakers, maybe future policymakers, legislators, et cetera, who are working to support and they have the goal of uplifting AAPI small business community, and perhaps, what are they not quite understanding?
So I guess as a restaurant, one of the for City of Cambridge in general itself is pretty giving to small businesses. I have to say there is a lot of grants, storefront improvement grants and things of that nature that are very helpful, workshops, things of that nature. Cambridge also being a very, like to be flat out honest, being a very liberal city, there tends to be a lot of reporting metrics that are very necessary that every business or every building you have to do, which eats up incredible amounts of time. For example, I have to spend hours a month reporting on all my different therm units I use in the restaurant and things of that. What part of it is, solar, which isn't, well, everything is solar now because it made my life easier. But just that process of sheer amounts of reporting data, which I understand is very important, and I did support the whole green building initiative in Cambridge, can be detrimental, and also the level of penalization if you do not file is also very $100 or $325 a day, like just no reprisals, nothing, just no reprieve rather, just absolute fines. I understand that they're fully geared towards very wealthy landlords and investment firms that own the vast majority of Cambridge properties, especially in squares that do reflect. But those can be detrimental to small businesses because if they didn't understand how to navigate Eversource's business side, not just even just paying your bill, but actually going through and navigating and connecting your electric panels so you can register, it took days just to figure it out, and paying those fines for those days. Luckily, we could eat that as a restaurant, but I can imagine a lot of small businesses couldn't in that case. So some of those pressures can be detrimental, and amount of time and energy you need to fulfill things for licensing requirements. Again, if you don't understand how to navigate things, can be also quite bad. Though they are moving to online with the Viewpoint Cloud, which if anyone is licensing, it's basically an online portal, which is very beneficial. But the problem with that, the amount of reporting requirements that you're supposed to put in those are huge. To do a liquor license here is absolutely insane. Probably took to get my patio, which is 8 seats, took 6 months to get it approved. 6 seats. Because there was a delay in traffic and parking to confirm that my patio was 6 inches away from the curb. They just didn't have the time out to measure the 6 inches physically, which was part of that, so I lost the entire summer period. But that red tape aside, in addition though, the good thing about having a city that is very supportive of small business, especially if they're minority owned, especially if they're small, is they do have a lot of easy to get, like, low-hanging fruit grants. They're never going to be enough to open a business. They're 5,000, 10,000, et cetera, which sounds like a lot, but in actuality, I spend that on chicken a week. But it is very helpful when you need to purchase a few things that maybe you don't have the money for, or allows you to improve things that you necessarily wouldn't improve. Because the one thing you also do notice, especially with Asian restaurants, is I call it the Asian restaurant carpet syndrome. When you go to older Asian restaurants, they have the old red carpet that slowly gets darker and darker red over time, with soy sauce and life, if you will know what we're talking about. But it allows you to replace those things, which is very nice. It beautifies your restaurant, which makes the small business community happy, and restaurant a more livable and nicer space for the workers and for the owners. So, yeah.
There are a couple of things that I'll add. I think one is, well, actually, just adding on what you were saying, I think one of the things that we're always trying to push different cities and towns on is just simplifying processes. Like, it does not need to take a year to get your diversity, minority-owned certification. Like, why is it taking that long, right? Like, there does not need to be. I think I read an article that was, it takes 95 steps to open a restaurant in Boston. Why does it take 95 steps? And who has the time to go through these 95 steps? So I think simplification is definitely something that different cities can adapt, so that you can have businesses start sooner, right? Like, then you're revitalizing your neighborhood in the economy. And so I think that's one. I think on the other side of things, technical assistance is really helpful, I think, if it's language accessible. So if you look at the different webinars and workshops out there, number one, if they need to be like in a time and a place that works for small businesses, right? Like, it can't just be in a time where Jason's like in the kitchen. He can't go to this workshop or whatever. It has to work for the business owner, but also it needs to be in a language that they speak, because when you look at the Small Business Administration's information, it's only in Spanish, right? In Spanish and English. Well, what about all the different languages that our communities speak, right? How are they going to get this information? They're going to need their family members to translate, or a friend, and that takes time, and that's extra burdensome, and then you're going to owe your friend something. So these are all things that I think we need to work on in terms of policy. The other thing is supplier diversity, when you're talking about contracting, right? Like that is something that we can actively do because corporations now have all these DEI strategies, right? That they kind of finagle you into thinking, oh yeah, we're invested into working with diversity businesses. But what are they really doing to making sure that they're working with diverse contractors, right? If they have a really big contract, they're gonna go with somebody or a company that can fulfill that, right? And that's not a lot of API small businesses. So if you wanna work with API small businesses, you need to make sure that your proposal is gonna be in biteable chunks where they can fulfill it and maybe work with another vendor, right? Combine their resources together so they can get into the system, right? Like Harvard, for example, right? Harvard doesn't, they have a procurement program. What is Harvard doing to make sure that they're working with diverse vendors and smaller vendors too, so that they can bring those folks into the fold and making sure that those businesses have room to grow and build their capacity.
Thank you. We also want to zoom out a little bit and think about kind of like the potential impact that small businesses can have on the communities and kind of like the broader ecosystems that they're located in. So there's a quote I really like by Saul Alinsky, who's known by some, considered by a lot of people to be the founder of modern day community organizing. He said, democracy happens in pockets and groups, not across a million people. Ordinary people should have a say and agency in their own living and working conditions. So given that it's almost like a different type of way of thinking about democracy, it's really people-oriented, really community-oriented. I have two different questions for you guys. So Chef Jason, how do you feel that you've seen it contribute to the Cambridge and broader Boston community? And QJ, what are ways in which you've tried to build connections between the AAPI community and other communities of color in this shared pursuit of greater equity and economic well-being and prosperity for all?
I guess as a restaurant, especially in a university town, they, normally, you'd give the speech that, we're supposed to be a secondary living room for most people to come and enjoy themselves, blah, 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 blah. Just like every restaurant will tell you. I would say it is a little more challenging in the landscape that is the Harvard community due to the I guess, the current just status of like landlords, rent, presence of chain businesses, and when you have, not to critique, the America is capital, part of capitalism is everyone can have freedom to make money, whatever it is. But when you have a largely chain business community around you, surrounded by, there's no connection between anyone. None of the money stays locally, it all goes abroad. And none of the managers and things like that really care to communicate with other businesses, because at that point it is capitalism at its purest, where everyone's competing with each other. They're not necessarily doing rising tides raise all ships type of deal. So Harvard as a community has been the most isolating for a business for me that I've done in multiple. I think I've done 19 restaurants in my career because there's really no localized. You have regional managers running restaurants. You don't have local general managers running restaurants. There are a few chef-owned concepts, but they tend to be part of larger restaurant groups where their home bases are also then based in Boston. So that's one. Local business association is also run by landlords here, so it's not really a business association; it's a landlords association. And then the restaurant group that was also in the Harvard area. I think the last time it was just myself and Grendel's Den that showed up. So, which is a local place. She's opening another restaurant down the street. So with that, I would say as part of the community, Harvard is more of an island, a series of islands that you go together, like archipelago, and you enjoy whichever part of your island. Ours happens to be the more tropical one. So that's how we live as thus. So I guess to go all the way back, the way we bring ourselves to the community is go back to that cliche. We just want to make it as fun of a place for people to go. We try to be at a price point that is reasonable for all classes. We don't, we're not going to be, $60 a person or $6 a person. We're in that weird, we're like Applebee's prices, as I like to say, right in the middle. Which is very rare. There's no middle class restaurants anymore because they fail. Costs are too high, and you're either fast food or you're fine dining because the only ways you can sustain yourself. That's why you see when old restaurants open, they don't open in the middle. They open in one of the two edges. So we purposely try to do middle because we're very lucky with our landlord, and we're very lucky that our base minimum that we need to earn is significantly lower than we had to pay Harvard Square prices. Even at our restaurant, we still pay about $25,000 a month, which is pretty crazy when you think about it. It is usable square feet. It'd be around 6,000. Full day is 7,400. You have mechanical rooms, elevator rooms. But because of if you've been to our building is very narrow. So 36 inches in the middle has to be for egress for handicapped individuals. So we technically only have 144 seats total, which is a mid-sized restaurant. So we technically should be hitting a cap around 2.5 million a year. We exceed that, so we're doing fine. But there's a reason why there's been a chain of failures in that area because of all that. So it's a very interesting business. But if you look at it, I'm not going to say the name, but there's another like a noodle-based restaurant that just opened more recently that pays more rent than I do. For like that's how crazy Harvard Square is for rent. I don't know how they survive because that's what we call billboard pricing. Starbucks on the corner. Everyone remember Starbucks on the corner? If you're old enough, sorry. The younger ones won't know. Starbucks on the corner used to pay over $1 million a year. Right now, it's like a Harvard, they sell shirts and stuff. Good for them. But like billboard pricing is crazy here. Absolutely crazy. That's why I don't think you'll see chef-owned restaurants much in Harvard anymore. You just really won't.
So I really like this question because I think it's so important. And I think my question was about, how do you build connections between AAPI communities and other communities of color, greater equity and economic well-being. I think it's going to be a work in progress because I think we are in this kind of tough situation where everyone's pitted against each other. And I think it's really, really difficult to bridge those gaps and heal those traumas and have real conversations. And I think it's challenging. But I think one of the things that I've been very grateful about is, as a new initiative, I have just been so lucky with the other counterparts of the organizations that are working with minorities. So the Black Economic Council in Massachusetts, Amplify Latinx, and also the LGBTQ Chamber of Commerce have just been so welcome because they get it, they understand, they know it's not a zero-sum game. So there are policies that we work towards. We're all on a task force around procurement, supplier diversity. We're on the wage equity gap legislation. So there are different ways that we collaborate, but I think that is on a very kind of like high level organizational collaboration kind of thing. I think there's a lot more work to do to have businesses of color come together and just be with each other and think about how they can support each other. I think there's still a lot of division between different communities and different harm that has happened that need to be repaired in conversations, because I think we do all have a shared vision of economic prosperity and we have more in common than not, but these are not things that we're taught. So I think that's the work that we have to do as a community.
Amazing. So in our last official question before we open up to the audience, so get thinking, we want to pick your brain on what kind of the future looks like, particularly for Asian American economic prosperity, like this big question that we're thinking about. So QJ, what is your dream vision for the council over the next 5 to 10 years? What is the role that organizations like the council play in fostering community development in private neighborhoods? And for Chef Jason, we want to ask, what is the outlook for your business and other AAPI small businesses around the country? Do you think we're going in a good direction? So whoever wants to go first, feel free.
That's a loaded question. I think I can go in many different directions, and I think a couple of things. One is, I think AAPI-owned businesses is such a broad category, right? Like you have these huge corporations that are global and that have a lot of money. What can we do to bring them into the ecosystem and have them invest in other communities that are not doing so well? Like, how can we empower each other? How can we get connected? How can we hold folks accountable to give back, right? I think that's a dream of mine, which I don't know how long it would take, but really looking forward to engaging with all companies of all sizes and really talking about what is corporate responsibility and what is giving back and what can you do for the communities that you're situated in. You have this huge building, but what are you doing for the people who are living next door? I think another piece is really building up capacity with the community organizations that have direct relationships with these businesses, and really having them work together and build a collaborative and think about, okay, here's one area that we excel at. Here's how we can support you as an organization, and for another organization to stay the same, right? Like, how do you build capacity as a collective to amplify the work that you're trying to do? I think those are the
I think my question is a lot easier because I get to talk my own business. So for us, we would probably want to hit our just go pure business terms. We probably want to hit our max PPA, which is our per person average, and we'll probably cap at 4.5 would be the goal in that space and what it can do for output without doing delivery or takeaway, because it's not the concept. It's delivery or takeaway. So that'd be goal number one. Number two would be expansion, which we're already looking at right now because we're already seeing our year 4 projections and we're year 1.5. But I guess for the overall goal for us is we need to be better, and I think a lot of Asian restaurants need to be better at controlling the narrative. Asian restaurants, in my opinion, are a bit fetishized in the sense where, like, if it's not like, these like weird hand-pulled noodles made by like albino monks from Tibet, it's not a cool Asian restaurant. Like that's kind of like a huge like thing right now. For us, we're very, we are American Chinese. There ain't nothing wrong with that because that's what I am. But the problem with American Chinese is, which I don't know if most people know, that most Asians are super tasters. Compared to a larger U.S. population, so they're much harder to tend to be a little more finicky. They tend to taste sweet and bitter much stronger, which are two things that American Chinese do very well. It is especially sweet. So for us, it's understanding who we are. Changing that narrative away from being like, it's gonna sound kind of weird that we're a Chinese restaurant. We slowly started scrubbing that off online very methodically, step by step, to make sure that we're more of like a bar and bar plates, just to make sure those expectations are met at a certain level. And you have to be, that sounds weird, but more self-aware, understanding your strengths, understanding your weaknesses, communicating those strengths and weaknesses to your guests to lower or raise expectations based upon what you can actually provide in a consistent manner. And that's the stage being about year 1.5, almost 1 year and 8 months right now. We're at that stage where we now have strong enough, team with us where we can now start altering the narrative or changing the narrative that the business needs. But for us, we see that the same with a lot of our friends who own small Asian restaurants, where like, my friend she Hagu, it's like a Spanish tapas and Japanese type of place. And then she always gets the questions, why doesn't she serve sushi? Because it's Japanese, like you should serve sushi. It's like, yeah, I have a Chinese restaurant. But one of the comments about yesterday from a Chinese guest is like, oh, you use Trader Joe noodles. We don't hand pull our noodles. We have an extruding machine. We actually bought a very expensive one that extrudes our noodles. And then I asked her, what's your favorite restaurant? They're like, Pammy's. I'm like, why? They have handmade noodles. Like, are they handmade or are they made in an extruder? They're like, oh, they're made in extruder. I was like, why do you call mine Trader Joe's, but Pammy's handmade? Like, well, because yours don't look handmade. I'm like, no, there's no grandma in Pammy's like freaking cutting it. No, it's not, I love Pammy's. I go there, have a Negroni at the bar and relax. But like, it's so we literally have to sit there and be like, holy crap, we got to hand cut noodles and make them look ugly. To me, it was like, so we started doing that yesterday. Like, we literally were just like, well, all right, man. Like, but so it's just like, just understanding those things as you develop as a company, you're just like, okay. And as a chef, you just don't take that ego hit. You're just like, well, they want hand cut noodles. We'll give them what they want. I spent $9,000 on that piece of metal right there, but like, and you just go with God, you do it, and then then you figure out like what you can achieve with your staff and labor and keep your costs low. And then that's the goal. And so what we try to tell like a lot of our friends, they're just like, don't you get angry? It's like, no, it's kind of funny to be honest with you. But it's like the one thing that we're really, and that probably goes back to your communication thing is, you look at a lot of small businesses, especially Asian businesses or minority businesses in general. You don't control the narrative. The narrative was already written for you by people before you here. So like I know I physically had to keep my restaurant. If you want a dumpster, for example, we spray that with a power washer every day. No other restaurant does it because I'm a Chinese restaurant. I have to be clean. Like if you have a Mexican restaurant, it has to be cleaner. It doesn't matter. Like I have all our suppliers walk like, you guys have the cleanest restaurants, like because we have to. Like if anything goes wrong, you automatically get accused of something else. Your noodles are from Trader Joe's. Your dumplings are purchased frozen. I wish like that would save so much labor and time. But anytime one of those comments happen, you're just like, okay, we actually have to alter the entire processes again to meet those expectations. It doesn't sound great. Sometimes it'd be mentally draining. But once you understand where you fit, you can either try to fight it, which we do in some cases. Like someone accused me that my bowels were purchased frozen. I was like, really, dude? Like, tell me where I can buy a chicken like that frozen. But but you just work through it. You alter your procedures, and then you try to make it reflect more of the talent you're actually putting on a plate. And that's kind of the stage we're in now, in the refinement stage, which is the hardest to get to because you have to get past that runway. You have to be financially secure. You have to be administratively secure. And your reputation has to be strong enough that if you do have a bad string, like a bunch of 1 stars because you did something wrong for me, you can survive that downturn, which hopefully we will be through within the next year. So yeah. Did that answer the question?
Yes, it was a loaded question. Amazing answers. Guys, that's the end of the official questions. Please, another huge round of applause. Oh yeah, I laughed a lot. I laughed so much on this panel. But do people have questions? We have 2 mics running. But yeah, open to anything. Questions about work, questions about, if you guys are open, you talked about your mom and really the loneliness of so many things, new menu items. Yeah, feel free to just raise your hand and the mic will come to you.
Thank you so much. That was brilliant. You spoke a little bit about narratives and the role of businesses in shaping narratives, and I'm curious, like, if any role do AAPI businesses have in shaping the narrative of diasporas in the US, particularly at this time when you're kind of coming out of this period of COVID and skewed perceptions of AAPI communities. Have small businesses played a role in shaping the narrative recently? Do they have a role in shaping the narrative going forward, either through their business activities or their community engagement?
No matter, in my belief, it means absolutely nothing to anyone here. Storytelling is the most important. I'll give you an example. We serve pad thai in our restaurant, which is a version of pad thai. It's the Thai people of China, not access to water, so it's tamarind fish sauce. People don't understand this, so people complain. It does taste like fish sauce. It is what it is. Talking to a guest, not an Asian guest. I went to Thailand this is not pad thai. I was like, why is this not pad thai? Blah, 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 blah. I go, okay, why did you enjoy that pad thai? They're like, oh, it tasted great. I'm like, did you enjoy it because you were in Thailand, on the street, a grandma was sitting there cooking for you? Did you actually remember what that pad thai tastes? And she's like, well, it tasted good. I'm like, no. You remember time and place. Time and place is far valued than anything I can put on a plate. And storytelling from a restaurant, from a small business, is what sells your brand. It's what really, really, really puts you on the map. Time and place and storytelling is the hardest thing for you to also develop. Because part of that is, you have to, especially as like a minority, which is harder for some other minority communities more than AAPI, is to really go like, is my story of value telling? Is the hardest thing to convince yourself of. Is my food worth charging $24 for pasta versus an Italian restaurant? Is it? No, maybe. Those are the things that I think is the hardest thing for a lot of minorities, whether API or others, to really sit down and say, of value, you are of value, you are of worth. I see it a lot of times, even with our guests of certain groups, when they come and they see a beautiful, like whatever, I love that my restaurant's beautiful, I'm gonna say it. You come into a beautifully viewed restaurant and you get turned away because there's 2-hour wait. And then sometimes you don't think there's a 2-hour wait. You think you've just been turned around because you don't dress, you don't fit the part. You yourself do not feel you are of worth to eat at my restaurant, even though I know you are. Hell, I'll take your money anytime. But we are honestly full. So it's those things that I think is really hard for any minority group, is to sit down and say, like, my stories we're telling is of value monetarily and out politically, whatever. Even myself, who, I've done this across the world. I've worked in, I've opened restaurants from Bora Bora to New York. And sometimes I sit down and go, I don't think I can charge that. And people are like, that restaurant on the street there for pork ravioli, they charge $40. Why are you charging $8 for Peking ravioli? I'm like, it's Chinese food. You still catch yourself in those reoccurring cycles, with the snake eating its own tail. So I would say that is the narrative from a restaurant perspective. That can be difficult.
Yeah, just adding on to that, I think there needs to be more platforms to tell multidimensional stories. I think that the stories out there are very one-dimensional. I remember we released a report on APIs and the diversity of our businesses and some of the struggles that we're experiencing. And this, I was interviewed by this news station, and the only takeaway they had was, well, Asian culture, they don't ask for help, so everything's great, and they're doing really well, right? So that was the only part they picked. So I think there needs to be that unapologetic, like, nuanced storytelling, and there also needs to be journalists that will write about it, from a multidimensional perspective. Luckily, we did have that in written form. The Boston Business Journal wrote a really nice piece on our report talking about the different needs and different successes. And, I think it's also about building that your network of trusted journalists who will tell the story, some of whom are actually from, grew up in Chinatown, or people from the community who actually get it, and can tell the story accurately. But I think there's also, when I think about my parents in particular, there's also a little bit of shame too, I think, in struggling too. So it's really hard, I think, for people to be honest about what it is that they need. So I think that part can be hard.
Any other questions?
Hello. Hi. So I came into this my program, the Master in Urban Planning, because I really want to study how we can use planning as a tool to create local economic resilience, and I'm particularly interested in creating that resilience through small businesses. It was a little bleak when you mentioned that these days it's just fast food restaurants or the high-end restaurants, because where does that leave everyone else in the middle to eat? Not a lot of options. And it made me wonder about the future of the small business ecosystem, and if this might be too general, but are we headed that way where it's really just like the businesses are at the extremes and a lot in the middle are disappearing? And as a follow-up question to that, as someone who is going into planning to, fight for the issues that you guys encounter every day, what are the priorities that I should be thinking about right now for the future?
I think it's not either or. I think there's a lot of different variables. I do think that there are leaders who really care about small businesses. The city of Boston, Mayor Wu, she first woman of color mayor. She's, her parents had a small business. I think they had a restaurant, although not in Boston. So she gets it. And I do think that there are folks out there who are really invested in immigrant entrepreneurship because they know that immigrant entrepreneurship can create wealth, right? So how do you foster that? How do you support that? It could be through grant programs, different. I think one of the things that a lot of small businesses struggle with is how do you move from the early stages to your next phase, right? Like how do you go from, being the only person, the CEO of everything, to hiring your second person, right? So I think part of that could be, cities have different grant programs, right? So instead of taking out a loan where you have to pay back, high interest rate, businesses are much more likely to take a risk if they have a grant, right? So those are the different levers that I think folks in the policy world can pull to support small businesses.
Zoning.
Yeah.
Zoning.
Yeah.
Number one is zoning. If Harvard had the chance ago to make it small businesses only, and city of Cambridge, if anything, has a lot of money, but a city's legal department cannot go against a large landlord's legal department. Just the level of capital and the level of time is impossible. If it went to public vote, it would have been fine, would have passed, like Keep Seattle weird type of vote, zoning's number one. Zoning businesses, otherwise you get 5 dig-ins. It used to be a beautiful little clothing store, things like that. That's number one. So even if it's zoning for ground level activation, businesses, even if it's under a certain percentage of square feet, because let's be honest, though I wish most minority businesses cannot afford a 300 seat restaurant. A restaurant to open in Massachusetts costs more now than San Francisco. So your cost per square foot is $900 for construction. That's all in. That's construction. So hard costs, not your soft costs, not inventories, staffing, lawyer fees, accountants. So you're looking at, my restaurant, if I didn't build it with one of during COVID, we had 6 months, we just built it with ourselves. When we bid it out to other companies, it was $3 to $4 million for that space. It was pre-existing restaurant before, so a lot of the infrastructure was already in place. There's no way a minority business can afford that. So they're always restricted to under 90 seat restaurants, which have a max cap of $1 to $1.5 billion in revenue. So that means they have a maximum investment of $250,000 to $300,000, which is someone's life savings. If you were to have zoning, for certain size plots, that automatically restricts the landlords, and automatically just, they're going to want rent. They're not going to want just a money sink, especially if cities like Cambridge would get into, forceful ground floor activation, which I think cities should do. Otherwise, you have whole movie theaters sitting empty for 12 years, which is tens of thousands of square feet, which should have been the foundry that opened up, in by Kendall Square, should have been in the middle of Harvard Square. But probably shouldn't talk a lot about local. But those for policy wonks is what I've been arguing for. I know a lot of the city parties over at the city of Cambridge also does a lot of arguing for, but it's just too hard for a city to do it against private capital. Especially, we're very lucky to be in a city that doesn't need money. I mean, heck, I think our city chief of police is the number 2 in the country paid. Our city planner is number 1, or number 2 in the city, more than New York paid. But with that, you would hope that there would be some way we could figure out how to keep small businesses in Cambridge. Otherwise, you look at Kendall, Sweet Greens, and things are moving in, only a few leasing agents like Graffito Stop, which I think works with Harvard, with a lot of your ground floor activation in Harvard, tries to pull in small businesses. So, yeah.
Hi, thank you. My name is Franklin. Before I get to my question, I just wanted to say really quickly, thank you both so much for sharing your stories. This is really personal to me because my parents own a Chinese restaurant in my hometown of Portland, Oregon, and it literally put me and my two younger sisters through college. And there's been periods where it didn't look like we would make it. And it has been hard. It has been heartbreaking for my parents. So I want to focus a little bit on the restaurant failure rate, which is obviously really high for the industry as a whole, but it's especially high for the most vulnerable, immigrants, people who don't speak English as their first language. So what can we do to kind of like support small business owners and entrepreneurs to make sure that they're getting the help they need? I think QJ, you mentioned that sometimes they don't even ask for the help, or they don't know that they could ask for the help. So, what is that combination of, helping them realize that there is support for them, and then providing that tailored and accessible support that helps them get that support that they need?
There's actually some really unique models out there, not in the Asian community, but hopefully we can, because there really is no use in reinventing the wheel. But well, I think there are, again, there's no shortcuts. I think it's really working with community organizations that have the relationships and building that trust. It's like if I send someone an email and say, hey, here's a survey, they're not going to fill it out, most likely, which unfortunately is kind of how we're doing the outreach right now. But we're also doing some other unique things. But I think it's really about going into a restaurant and really sharing who you are as a person, and how you can support and building that relationship over time. Like if I go into Jason's restaurant and I just say like, here's what I can do for you, like, how am I going to prove that, right? It's really about building that relationship. And also like, it's hard for people to be vulnerable and say like, oh, I'm in debt of this much, right? Like it takes time for people to trust that you're actually going to do something about it in a way that's not going to, be a judgment or shaming or whatever. So I think that's why it's really important for us to be working with these community organizations that do have the relationships, that know the people behind these businesses, right? It's run by people.
I guess for me, looking at more at I guess the reason why restaurants fail, just 99.999% of the time, is just cash on hand, war chest. If you remove the necessity for war chest, you have a significant chance of success. The only way that I've seen that it's worked is through like you have not necessarily a privately owned and operated food hall, but it's more of like like Pike Place, when it's owned by the government, it's owned by the local, and it has set rules in place. And with that is attached, coaching classes and things like that from a community members that they lead, know, and trust. That removes a high rate of failure because then they're allowed to stockpile cash, and after a certain amount of either months, years on their lease, they move on and try to open their own things. So that way, you also have fresh blood rotating through to keep that place relevant in the social norm, which is harsh because you end up kicking people out. That for me is probably the only thing that I've seen be successful. Because in the end, like not to be brutal, not to be mean, cash is always king. And if you don't have cash on hand, you're gonna fail. There will be people that are always, was it the exemplars prove the rule? Was it? I forget that term, but there will always be people that like hit it off. They do some weird Instagrammable thing like multicolored like fish with ice cream, and they sell it, and it does well, and they're able to turn their little food cart into a restaurant that really does not have. You can't even do food trucks in Massachusetts because they're all made in like the South, so they're not insulated, so they die during the winter. Fun fact: don't do a food truck. So which is another startup thing that a lot of restaurants do, but they don't realize. New England, no food trucks are built that way. That would be the only way that I would see to solve it. And again, that goes to zoning, that goes into public property being owned and managed, which then builds up red tape. But other than that, there's no way banks will make money accessible for restaurants because their fail rates are so high. It's a catch-22, but they fail because they don't have cash. So. Sorry about that.
That's the reality.
That's the reality.
Go for it.
Can you talk a little bit more about this sort of narrative change piece? I'm curious if maybe some of the origin story of sort of the ultimate concept that you landed on, this sort of tiki bar plus American Chinese restaurant. I think there's restaurants like I think Blossom Bar in Brookline and like Pinch in New York, where you go there and you're like, wow, like I'm paying like real big prices for this food where I could go somewhere else, maybe that's more quote unquote authentic, that is cheaper, but in some ways I feel very happy that I'm doing that. And I go to these restaurants and I see people from like diverse ethnic backgrounds paying big prices for what would traditionally be kind of the ravioli that you're talking about. And so I'm curious if there's a way for Chinese food to exist in both areas. If restaurants can continue to flourish in this sort of Panda Express food delivery area, but if it's also possible for people to push and find pockets where it's also seen as more refined upscale food.
Where I was going. So I'm Edward Cunningham from the Kennedy School. Just two things, and again, maybe it's more to you as well, Jason. But how do you were talking about how you're scrubbing sort of Chinese, right, from the website. I think of it as more. So my grandfather was an Italian chef, and my mother worked in restaurants as well, and then in Italy. And we had a similar challenge, which is that you come here. I don't know if you ever saw the movie Big Night. Have you seen that? Yeah. So it's that exact issue, which is the Americans don't understand what Italian food is. And that movie's all about the back and forth between the chef who wants to produce Italian food and the manager brother who says, no, we're in the business, give them whatever they want. Right? So I'm interested in how do you control the narrative, back to his question around how do you think about Chinese American versus Chinese? I'm interested in that. Certainly, I think in our community, Italian is leaps and bounds higher than Italian American, right? Because they're fundamentally different things. I think that's what you're insinuating, maybe in a way, or at least alluding to, that there's kind of a pecking order, and there's sort of real Chinese food, and then there's Chinese American food that has had to face that issue and therefore dilute basically its taste in a way. I'm thinking like growing up here in 1980s Chinese food. Here, right, exactly. So what does that mean to you, and how are you trying to control that through that Chinese American versus Chinese? And the last very small one, selfish question. I mean, soup dumplings, right? There is an issue, right? Soup dumplings, I cannot get soup dumplings in the United States. So something's going on. I keep asking every chef I ever talk about, but that thinness of that skin, why can't we produce that in the United States? So that's just my own personal, if you can talk offline, but that's important.
So the reason why people feel okay going to Blossom Bars when they pay, I think it's $20 a cocktail, something like that. They're okay with this because you're in America, and everyone in America thinks they're going to be millionaires. They want to live that life. That's just not good. Go to these places because it's Instagrammable. You go to these places because you can show your friends, you can show your colleagues that I went to Blossom Bar. Nothing wrong with that. It's the American dream, right? Like that's what we all want to be. With that, part of the reality of the American dream is a lot of those people never hit those numbers, just because there's only so much to go around. And they don't want to brag they're eating at a middle-class restaurant. And Chinese American food is middle-class food. It was designed for working class Americans. I am a working class American. I serve working class food, and I'm okay with that, because that's the vast majority of people you're going to meet in your life. With that though, you can elevate I guess, in any form. You know, I can just go there and buy truffles and foie gras, throw that shit on a plate and call it a day. Sorry. But that's not the core of my business belief. You know, that's not personally what I want to do. Chinese American food is still under the very diverse tableau of Asian cuisine. It is. And tiki is very important to that because, you know, for a long time, like that's what was paired with Chinese food. Like the original tiki bars were exotic food. It was Cantonese food. And like that's what it was. It was Cantonese food that was like pineapple sprinkled on top, so people can, you know, better recognize and think they were escaping. It became very popular, and then it died in the 60s, 70s, and then, you know, Chinese restaurants were like, shoot, we need a little more money. What do? We need to sell liquor. How do we sell liquor to these people? Just put pineapple with like rum and call it a day. Rum is dirt cheap. It was the cheapest liquor you could possibly buy. And those fruit juices you've got in can, they were also very cheap. Now they're very expensive because you got to squeeze everything fresh. It's crazy. Like limes are $80 a case right now. It's crazy. But you know, with that, because of the history with it, you'll never be able to increase the price. It's just not. It's just like, you know, there's only so much you could charge for chicken parmesan. But for timpano, go back to Big Night, you could do a great deal for that. But you know, that's okay for me. My family had a Chinese American restaurant. I grew up throwing darts and drinking, you know, Shirley Temples out of like, you know, ceramic pineapples, and I loved it. And that's what I wanted to bring back here, honestly. And I also have this really, I don't want to say like kind of like far-fetched belief that like everyone should be able to eat in a beautiful restaurant and afford it. Like not to be like, but like I doubt you can go to a restaurant. So the average guest in Boston spends $44 per person for appetizer, entree, drink. Okay, my restaurant is $32 on average guest spends. We're significantly lower than the Boston median. So if you go to the South End, you're gonna spend. We've all been there. We spend $100 for two people, like that. Then tax and tip, and that's $120. No problem. You would have to buy a crap ton of food on my menu to do that. To be honest with you, you'd be full. My average cocktail, I think, is $13. Even though we use, you know, we use very good quality product, but we design the menu and everything as such to really go all into a few brands. And because of that, I am the largest rum purchaser in New England. Thanks to you guys. I buy pallets of rum. Appleton rum from Jamaica, and like when Karuba rum comes to the United States, I get the allotment, and I get to choose who else gets the allotment because I get first dibs. Because we go through a god awful amount of rum, like it is, you guys, like Harvard man. You're also the highest consumers of tequila in England as well. Go to Felipe's, they do pallets of tequila. It's disgusting, but it's cool. You know, so like, I still can't believe that. But because of that, we've been able to tailor our menu to go really hardcore to a few high quality items. Like all our pork's organic and it's all grass fed and stuff like that from Duperton in Canada. But because it's a Chinese restaurant, we buy a metric crap ton of pork. I can get that price, which I think if you go and you open a restaurant, you pay $6 a pound for that pork. I pay something like $1.65. Because I only buy pork shoulder, I grind everything myself, blah, 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 blah. Bone in, I get a much cheaper price. So it's understanding those levels of economics to get it to that price point. I don't think because of the theme, which was chosen very specifically, which is a tiki bar, I could charge more because it is still a bar and it's still like kitsch. Yeah. The reason why we chose kitsch and a tiki bar for that location is one, there's no front signage because it's historic. No one's ever going to find me in any way, shape, or form. So whenever you're creating a business, everyone's here Asian, so you probably get the term. You always target the otaku first, because the otaku will show up every day. They'll give you money, and then if they love it, they'll tell all their friends. And if you're good enough, their friends will tell their friends, and then there'll be a steam, downhill like snowball. So we very much knew that in New England, those old school aku-akus and the Chinese, like Kowloon was the last one. We're not gonna mention other Chinese restaurants that still serve scorpion bowls and things of that nature, but there was very few higher quality places that were not $20 a drink. So like, okay, there's a niche here. There's a large Asian American population in Harvard that's underserved. Even though students that go to Harvard tend to be of a higher economic, than most places, there's still always just a hard cap on what people are willing to spend at a certain age demographic. There is a large Asian female demographic as well, which tends to be Instagrammable, tends to be on social media a lot, and that likes pretty things of high quality. So we can fill a gap that was lacking in the area. Like just to be purely business, unromantic about it, not gonna tell you some story about, again, like, albino monks pulling noodles on a rooftop. So when you're sitting down, you're creating a business, if you don't have the business language and you can't sit down and read demographics, go to the city, pull the censuses, talk to the local business owners, sit down, do your counts, and go, can I actually pay $25,000 a month rent here and make it? Can my prime costs be below 50% here and make it? Can I serve the food at that prime cost that I'm so proud of and make it? Because I could sit there and buy canned, produce and pre-made noodles and things like that and serve it and make money and just make money. But are you proud of it? I guess that's the other thing. I don't know if that answered your question at all or your question. And the reason why you don't get thin dumpling skins is to make actually true dumpling skins. If you go to Din Tai Fung, they lie to you. Real soup dumpling skins are probably 30% leavened bread, 70% hot water dough that you have to combine in a very certain amount of time, which takes a lot of skill. That level of skill workmanship here in America does not exist because of the cost of labor. If you go to Din Tai Fung and you go to Taiwan, there's 4 floors, each one, which most people don't know, are dedicated to different groups of people. So for example, I went there and I didn't speak Chinese. I don't speak Chinese. They assumed I was Japanese, so they brought me to the Japanese floor, which was a different level of service. But when they found out I was English, they took me to the top floor, which was even better service and a more full menu with liquor. So you can't do that in America. You get canceled tomorrow. So at that level of that's why hotels in foreign countries are also better because labor is much cheaper. You go into Vietnam, go to Hotel Metropole, and you go to the Ritz here in New York. Hotel Metropole is going to be leaps and bounds better.
It's labor, not necessarily ingredients.
It's labor. It's sheer cost of labor to do those things. That's why dim sum in China is always going to be better. That's why.
Got one. Hey, so my name is John Eng. I'm here with Evelyn Reyes. We are on the board of a new nonprofit here in the city called Fan Chinatown. One of our primary goals of this new nonprofit is to help support the existing Asian AAPI restaurant infrastructure in the city. I guess even just thinking outside the box, what are some ways that you guys think that from a grassroots level, all of us can kind of do to support the existing infrastructure? I know that's way outside zoning and some of the other things you've talked about, so I just want to ask that question.
So as a restaurant owner, I guess the one thing that I would say is the hardest to justify on my bottom line would be marketing, because there's always a piece of equipment breaking. There's always something that's going. That's number one. As long as you can get, as we would to go back, at least in my opinion, who knows if that's worth anything. Storytelling is always going to get people through the door. And a lot of times that I've noticed, especially from older minority-owned restaurants, they don't have any kind of they don't know it should be a 12-second reel and it should have 3-second jump cuts with some I don't do that in my stuff. I don't give a crap. It's just me 7 in the morning, like, oh shit. But I think that kind of literacy can get butts and seats, because then someone that's maybe more aware that can pull in connections from now it's influencers are running trash nowadays. Now it's creatives, but the relationships building and introducing to these hidden gems that in Chinatown we can get an authentic banh mi for under $8 and things like that. I think will actually measurably bring in cash, versus like I said, grants. I don't mind grants. Not to rag on them, but they're often short-term band-aids, which band-aids are great. Band-aids help heal, but they're not the final end all. It's you as someone helping a restaurant have no control over the quality of the product, but the quality of the product is good enough giving them a voice to show the world that there's a good quality product here at a good reasonable price. Often minority restaurants are much cheaper in price. If we can get butts and seats, that helps. Just bottom line, raw cash in. And then I would say for me, if I was in that, state that I needed, that would be knowing what I know about my business and how it runs. I would say that would be number one versus grants for me. Grants and things of that would be just getting people to market and taking that market and exposing it to a broader, often more affluent market that will come in and be like not to be a dick, but we all like, oh yeah, I know this place in Chinatown that's very authentic, and they go and they spend significantly more money than the locals, and if the product's good enough or of reasonable authenticity, whatever the hell that means nowadays, depending on who thinks things are authentic and not, it brings in just cash, and that's, trust me, cash will always help the restaurant.
Thank you.
I think we are at time. Was there one more? Oh, man. Yeah, go for it. Do you guys have time?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, go
Dinner's
for it.
at, 3 minutes. That's fine. I just yell.
I think we can hear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, okay. Hi. Thank you both so much for sharing. And I know we don't have a lot of time. Maybe this is a loaded question, so maybe you could just pin it for later. But I was kind of curious. A few of us in this room talked about what food in both cooking and eating means for us. There's been college support, there is generational connection, there's just a lot in a family-run restaurant. And I was curious if either of you have, what have you had to do to navigate the space between perhaps immigrants of older workplace ideology, and you today, which again, loaded question. I think there's a lot to unpack with factors and generational, just generational differences. But the reason why I ask is because I remember back in California, there's a lot of coffee shops that are built up, but there is a very big tension between the older business owners who operate on quote unquote Korean business practices versus the new and upcoming business owners who are, as was mentioned, more Korean American. So I'm wondering how both of you have had to navigate and hold that space in the same breath.
I guess as a restaurant owner, there has to be a point in your mind where it clicks that you still have to run it like a business. You can't just play restaurant. You can create the best and most delicious tasting food in the world, but if you can't control your costs, you fail regardless. Through that, I know a lot of my replies have sounded cold or very just frank, because there has to be a point in time, at least as a chef, where you have to leave your ego behind. You do put yourself out into the world. You do get a lot of criticism that is often hidden behind the internet, which can mean what is it, anonymity plus opinions equal assholes. So with that, you have to be able to at some point in your career be like, okay, that's fine, read between the lines, fix it, because it's often a trend that you're trying to solve. And with that, the older generation, you have to, at least when I've done coaching with people who are trying to, there's always that transition from that I've seen is often the father runs a business and the daughter's taking it over type of deal. Trying to show them that it's purely a business transaction, that it's a business side, and this is where the bottom line will improve in your steps and actions. Often when you're of an older, at least in my experience that I've seen in business coaching, things like that, as long as you can speak the business vocabulary, it makes the younger generation sound like they know what they're doing. And then often there's a few points of giving, hey, fine, take this aspect, let's get on third-party deliveries because it's going to increase my revenue by X amount. As long as you can have that vocabulary, which is the hardest thing to teach, especially to immigrants of where it's not their native language. You can often show them just, again, raw numbers like, hey, we can increase your business by this amount, which means your profitability is going to be this much. is what I've seen in practice.
Yeah. I would agree with that, especially because my parents belong to that older generation critical thinking. And I think in my younger days, I think I led with my values and my principles and my sense of justice. That never works. So yeah, everything you said, I think makes a lot of sense.
Numbers are king. They're always king. Like, just one quick thing. I know you guys gotta leave. Like, I was helping this small business in Union Square, a vegan concept. Younger kid, chef, had like 150K in the bank, wanted to open a small restaurant. He showed me the lease, he showed me the thing. I said, don't do it. Don't do it. Like you're gonna work yourself to death for 2 years because that's what your runway is. You won't profit enough and then you're gonna close. And they got aggressive, like, you know what, the lease is good. The person next to me did it. I'm like, doesn't matter what they did. That could be, again, that could just be a fluke. Like you always got to go by your numbers. He did it 2 years, closed it. Now he has to go work for a hotel or something like that to make money again. It sucks, but like sitting people down and going over P&Ls and going over your number and seeing what your runway is the most important. And any generation can understand that, like, more cash is more money. Like as long as you can communicate that and demonstrating how that can happen in a concrete way, I found to be the most successful. But you can never break that if the person that's on the receiving end can't, not to put it harsh, but like put maybe not the dream aside, but to understand that there has to be numbers and finances behind the dream. Sometimes you have to alter things. Everything in life can change. Your dreams can change at different ages. And what you think is a success now is much different than success at 40, success at 60. And communicating that to them is the hardest point, and then trying to determine what they think success is going to be. And sometimes that is as simple as like my son or daughter taking over the business. If being successful is successful enough for me, that I can let go. Sometimes I can't though, So it is what it is. Cool.
We are out of time, but thank you so much, everyone, for these really engaging questions. Like enlightening us to the behind the scenes of small business space. Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for coming.